Vasanthi Hariprakash, and I'm joining you from Bangalore, and it's wonderful to be facilitating a one-of-its-kind virtual gathering on the subject of kindness and compassion. But let me not waste even a moment in bringing him and introducing Mr. Gurumurthy, a chartered accountant by profession. Shri Gurumurthy is a renowned writer, journalist, activist, and corporate advisor. An RSS ideologue, he is also the co-convenor of the Swadeshi Jagaran Manch. He edits the very popular Tamil political weekly Tughlak, and he has ceaselessly campaigned against corruption at high places, exposing the bribery in Bofors arms deal and the nexus between the corporates and the government. Mr. Gurumurthy is going to speak on building an empathetic social equity for the nation. So, which means you and I are going to hear him talk about the hallmark of what an empathetic society is, what it takes to be a part of a social capital that is healthy for India. We will reflect on what kind of a world that we are raising for our children in, and whether our own approaches vis-a-vis rights and duties need to be examined. Vanakkam and welcome to Mr. Gurumurthy.
Thank you so much. You have been quite generous about your introduction of me. I am a product of not so much scholarship and studies as by my experience of the society from diverse angles: economic, social, political, cultural, religious. It has been an unbelievably complex and difficult experiences which I underwent ceaselessly for the last 4 decades, which made me see the world from that perspective. It's not a silo-based approach. It's not an approach based on an economic perspective or social perspective or cultural perspective or anthropological perspective. It's a whole comprehensive helicopter-based approach from which I studied economics, I studied sociology, I studied politics, I studied society. So, unless you have a comprehensive approach, it will not be possible to have grasp and understanding of any particular component of human life. I will begin with where Mahatma Gandhi and H.G. Wells had a correspondence about the much celebrated Universal Declaration of Human Rights. When H.G. Wells approached Mahatma Gandhi with his draft document of Universal Declaration of Human Rights and asked Mahatma Gandhi to endorse it, Mahatma Gandhi sent a one-line reply that I would be very glad to endorse this if you change the title from Universal Declaration of Human Rights into Universal Declaration of Human Duties. He gave a beautiful explanation that the duty of one is represented by the rights of others. Underlying one's duty is the right of another. For example, the right of a child is embedded in the duty of the parents. But if you look at the rights of the child independently of the parents, of the relationship, then the rights will have to be enforced by a third agency. It may be the law, it may be the court, it may be the government. Then the cohesiveness of the entire family structure is lost. And if you don't look at relationships as the basis of human life, and if you look at contract and law as the foundation of human life, then you are missing out something, and you are bringing in a third element, which is corrupt, and you are asking local policemen to settle the disputes between husband and wife under the Domestic Violence Act. You can understand what kind of justice one can expect. So it requires a more comprehensive approach to understand that compassion and love are not products of institutions. They are product of individual understanding, which has to be uh, based on the enlightenment a person gets from various sources, including spirituality, religion, the social norms, and the normative order as distinct from legal order. You know, the world has been moving in a particular direction in the last 100 years based on rights paradigm. The individual rights, then human rights, then women's rights, then gender rights, then children's rights, then elders' rights, then animal rights. But who is going to enforce all these rights? There is no mechanism which can enforce the rights paradigm other than the institutions which are themselves shaky and collapsing. And I don't know how many of us are aware today, liberal democracies which are promoting this rights paradigm in a big way and are the products of the rights paradigm. They promote rights paradigm and are produced by the rights paradigm. Only 13% of the world lives under liberal democracies today. The Foreign Policy magazine 2019 January brought out a very, very significant report that liberal democracies are failing all over the world for the reason that the individuals who are the products of the rights paradigm are not taking interest in public affairs. 35% of the youths in liberal democracies do not go to vote at all. Only 45% of the youths vote. And it's a big concern whether the rights paradigm, which is promoting unbridled selfishness, me, my life, my happiness, is going to sustain the collective of democracy, which requires that you owe a duty to protect democracy. The duty to protect democracy is minimum exercised by your voting right. You are not even voting. So the Foreign Policy magazine said in 2019 that it is only the Indian democracy which is the silver lining and golden lining of democracy in the world, because if Indian democracy is added, the total population living under democracies is about 32%, 31%. If all so-called democracies where there is some kind of election is added, it is 44%. 56% of the world population lives under utter dictatorship, where there is no duty or anything. There is no court, there is no law, there is no mechanism to enforce anybody's rights. So what are we talking about? So when we look at this as some kind of a silo, then you are actually misled. You need to understand it on a larger perspective, because the West has failed to discipline itself first. You see what is happening in the American democracy today. There is war, civil war virtually. Why? Why these democracies are failing? Because they have promoted such unbridled rights consciousness without any sense of duty. Now, who is going to be the arbiter between people claiming different kinds of rights? It is the police, it is the court, it is the state, which are weakening by the day because your own youths are not voting. So the Foreign Policy magazine said there is something very different about Indian democracy. In the West, in the liberal democracies, it is the more educated people who vote, people who have more income who vote, people who are more educated who vote, and the less educated, the minorities, the people who have lesser income, their voting percentage is far less. They are top-down democracies. They think they view the world from their own perspective. They create the world in their own perspective. But in India, it is different. 75% of the minorities vote. 65% of the backward caste vote. And only 49% of the so-called forward caste vote. Only 45% of the educated people vote. It is a bottom-upwards democracy. And so there is a huge difference between India, which is actually seen as the bulwark of democracies, where the rights paradigm and the duties paradigm are aligned. In India, it is not pure rights paradigm which is operating. Rights paradigm is limited to areas where the state is concerned with you. Between human beings, there is no rights. It is only duties. And you must have an education system. You must have a spiritual orientation to promote duty consciousness. And it is this duty consciousness that makes India and Asia different from the West. But we are looking at the Indian scene from the Western perspective, which means we are trying to play cricket with hockey rules. We cannot understand cricket from hockey rules. So there has to be a different approach to understand where the Western world has led the world into and where they are now looking to India, even to protect democracies. So this approach that the entire world will be based on the Western paradigm was a product of one-size-fits-all model approach, which was institutionalized in 1951 by the United Nations. And everyone thought it is the Western model which is based on unbridled individualism, which atomizes the families, the societies, the communities. That will be the foundation of socio-economic development. And the socio-economic development was fostered by the Western thinking, and globalization made it even more. That unbridled individualism, which is sans relationship, sans human individual duties to one another, is the basis of economic development, social progress, social justice. These very, very attractive words were used to sell the idea of unbridled individualism and rights consciousness, sans duties, sans relationships, sans human approach to humans as a norm of life. And this entire one-size-fits-all model was virtually discarded by the G20 nations in the year 2005 in their finance minister and Reserve Bank, central bank governors meeting in Beijing, where they said this one-size-fits-all model of economics, which means it includes sociology, will not work, and each country will have to work out its own model. This is not factored into by people who talk about human rights, who talk about unbridled rights. When the socio-economic system itself is different for different countries, different societies, based on their cultural ethos, based on their social norms, based on their family as an institution. That means you cannot have a universal behavior based on rights. So we have to understand with the helicopter perspective how different nations are. It cannot be that America cannot live like India, India cannot live like America, Japan will never live like America, and China can never be part of the world at all because they are not part of any rights paradigm. Even the duty is to the state. So it is a dictatorship. So how do we understand the complexity of the world? And we are having information from different parts of the world, but our information usage is selective, our idioms are selective, our approaches are selective, because our education is selective. So we need to have a very different approach. And in 2005, the G20 nations said this. In 2008, precisely this, the World Bank said, we have experienced in our work that there is nothing like a one-size-fits-all model which will work. Each nation, each society will have to work out its own model of development. They can share common experiences. So it means there is no one-size-fits-all model. It cannot be that a society will be based only on rights. There has to be a mix of rights and duties. All our great thinkers, whether it is Vivekananda, whether it is Mahatma Gandhi, whether it is Aurobindo, they have all spoken about a mix of rights and duties. Rights is only when you come to an institution. So far as individuals are concerned, it is only duties. This relation-based society, which fosters duty consciousness, is the foundation of empathy and compassion. I don't think there can be a more empathetic cultural institution more than the family itself. The rights consciousness first destroys the family. If anyone claims rights in a family, the family is over. Everybody contributes their duty to the family, and the collective of the duties becomes the right of everybody. That used to be so even in our incomes. We used to contribute all our income to the family. And there used to be a collective decision on even the expenditure. And if this model, which largely applies in India, is destroyed or undermined, what will happen? Look at America today. 55% of the first marriages end in divorce. 67% of the second marriages end in divorce. 74% of the third marriages end in divorce. There are only 28% American families where couples live together with children. And the functions of the family of taking care of the elders or infirm people or children or unemployed people have been taken over by the state through the social security mechanism. In 1983, the important minds, brains in the economic field, including Milton Friedman, who got the Nobel Prize, they attended a conclave and they said the state intervention in families, in between the intergenerational duties, that is the duty of the children towards the parents or the parents' duties towards the children, if that is taken over and interfered with by the state, then the families will be ruined. In 1983, there is a book called American Economy in Transition, published by the American National Bureau of Economic Research in America, in which those great minds had said, don't try to bring in economics and rights into the family. Don't bring market economics into the family. But I don't think there is any discussion or debate about all this, because actually it is based on silo approach. And human life is not silo based. Human life is to be measured from the time when a child is born till somebody is dead. There is a collective living mechanism, norms, behavioral norms. This is what has sustained the human race for thousands of years. And your rights paradigm has not been able to survive even for a few decades. And there is a question mark over the rights paradigm. And as Asia emerges as the important or the most powerful economic engine of the world, the paradigm of rights, unbridled rights, unquestionable rights will be modified. And when you have that kind of individual right only, you are not even replacing the dead by the newborn, and the population are regressing in Europe. With the result, people live without families, without any commitment, without any relationship, without any children, and without producing the next generation. And they say in a few decades, There may not be many Scandinavian countries left. Do you understand how rights consciousness, which atomizes an individual from the family, from the community, and the society, can result in consequences which are disastrous for a society itself? So, we need to understand that there has to be a relation-based approach. In relation-based approach, there is a trade-off. You trade off your rights and substitute it by duties. And this is where compassion is. Compassion is a product of duties. It is not a product of law. It is not a product of justice. Justice can be enforced only by an institution, whether it is the police, whether it is the court or the state. Anything that is enforced is not compassion. Compassion is something which comes from within, and it is a product of ecosystem. And the society oversees whether somebody is compassionate or not, whether it is a compassionate father, whether it is a compassionate son, whether it is a compassionate husband, whether it is a compassionate wife. Society has no law, but it is an eye. It makes opinions. That is why you want to destroy the society, because you want to live without any kind of control over yourself. It is the most selfish human being who seeks the maximum rights, and those rights ultimately destroy market economics itself. I don't know how many of you are familiar with economic discourse in the world today in the last decade or so. In 2008, when the economic crisis came and hit the Western economies, and Asian economies recovered very fast, The Economist magazine wrote a story, astounding comeback about Asia, in which it had said that Asia came back because it had a relation-based, society-based approach. It had worked with market economics and relationship. So it is a markets economics. But the West had converted the whole society, family, relations into market. Everything is market-based. So the Asian recovery has been faster, and Asia saves more. It is more responsible. It unburdens the state because of the duty consciousness of the people. Let us assume if all Indians decide that we will pay a 5% tax, and we don't want to take care of the parents, we don't want to take care of the elders, we cannot take care of the infirm people, we don't want to take care of the unemployed people, I will lead my life. There will be no government of India. We must understand what are we talking about. What kind of education we are giving to ourselves and to our children. We have to first make them understand, and we have to understand what is our duty to them, what is their duty to us. It is very naturally done, but your public education system destroys this and still want to produce a compassionate society. It is just an impossibility. So in my view, the paradigm shift from utterly rights-based approach to a duty-based approach is the foundation for building a compassionate society. And if anyone speaks of rights and justice, then there is something seriously wrong with that approach, because it requires the intermediation of the state, corrupt police, corrupt courts. There is the compassion. Because when you promote that kind of avarice, that kind of unbridled desire, ambition, which is not restrained by any kind of internal control, there cannot be any compassion. And there will be only orphanages and things like that, which we will not take care of our own parents, but we will be donating for elders' homes. We will not be taking care of our own children, but we will be giving scholarship for general. And this we call as compassion. This we call as justice. I think it is ridiculous. The society can never be replaced, and we should not allow it to be replaced, Because states may come and go, politicians may come and go, laws may come and go, even constitutions may come and go. But the relationship tradition which has been built for thousands of years, which has been adjusted from time to time according to the social system that is in offing, that has to continue. We have to create a proper intellectual, moral, spiritual, social, economic discourse. It's already happening, but unfortunately it is not percolating down. And so we are just reading newspapers and third-rate magazines and building up our intellectual thoughts and saying it is this right and this justice and that justice, without knowing who will do it. There has to be a natural mechanism to do it. That is the family, that is the community, that is the society. And if there is any excess in it, democracy will take care of it. We should call the state, the court, the police as exceptions. There cannot be a state-dependent society. There cannot be a police-dependent society. There cannot be a court-dependent, government-dependent society. And a society which has normative behavior of self-management is the permanent asset that is called social capital. This social capital is a product of relationship. And unless there is relationship, there is no social capital. Financial capital belongs to you. If you have money, it belongs to you. If you have brains, the intellectual capital belongs to you. The social capital belongs to all. And that social capital is created by relationship between all people. If you destroy the relationship through the ideas of unbridled rights, which promotes unbridled selfishness, and which even goes to the extent of destroying the liberal democracies which produce this very idea of rights, then you can understand you are dynamiting what you create with which you created it. So it requires a very vast understanding of, very vast bandwidth of understanding the society. And I believe that a new body of intellectual thoughts are generating all over the world, because the world has experienced the short-lived shelf life of the contemporary ideas. Colonialism lasted for 200 years. Everybody thought that was going to be permanent. Capitalism lasted for 100 years. Everybody thought it would be the final thing. Communism lasted for 50 years. Everybody thought it was permanent. Globalization came 25 years back. Today, everybody says we are in the post-globalization world. Actually, in the post-COVID world, the most important paradigm is going to be relationship paradigm, which is based on duties, and unbridled rights paradigm will be seriously at a discount. And I request all of you to think about it. Don't react. You see, we have a tendency to dismiss a counter view which we don't like. But our likes and dislikes do not make our life. It doesn't make this family's life. It doesn't make this society. It is understanding that our likes and dislikes must be under check, which makes a family, which makes a community, which makes a society, and which enables an individual, the society, to live on its own without the state, without the police. If you look at India, which has 668,000 villages and towns, we have only 14,800 police stations. But still, the crime rate in India is the lowest. Theft in India is the lowest. Dacoities are the lowest. Murders are the lowest. Rapes are the lowest in the world. Do we know that this is the United Nations published figures? You can get it in nationmaster.com. So we have to open ourselves to receptively about knowledge sources to build our propositions. Then only we can understand what we are talking about. Otherwise, we will be utterly theoretical. This is all I have to say. If you have any questions, I will be able to address. Thank you very much.
Saying that if you really were to give a gist of how do you move from a rights-driven society to a duty-driven society in, in actually followable terms, she says.
You have to look at how your grandma lived. If she had not lived for the family, if she had thought her rights are more important than her duties, her likes are more important, her dislikes are more important, then you would not have inherited the family which you have got today. This has nothing to do with your laws, with your court, with your police. These are all transient mechanisms. It may come and go. But the more permanent institution is the relationship where you give in. You have to give in your rights and you have to compensate it by your duties. In return, you get the duties. So you forget about all that you, in fact, during the freedom movement, our Acharya Kripalani told me, he was a great leader. When he was staying in Chennai, he told me that he used to teach the history of India as the British wanted him to teach. And after the students came out of the class, he said, "Don't believe one word of what I have taught you, because this I have been forced to teach." So whatever you are getting in the newspapers they are all exceptions. Don't go by that. Don't build your life. Don't extrapolate your life by thoughts which have nothing to do with you.
Does it also mean, therefore, a suppression of individuality, which seems to be taking so much of precedence in the current times?
You can see how individuality and individual rights are different. Individuality is not individual rights. We had very great, Vivekananda was one of the greatest person who developed an individual personality. Mahatma Gandhi, Tughlak, and any scientist, C.V. Raman, a man who demonstrated, but he had a tuft. And he used to do his daily rituals, religious rituals. Where is the conflict between individualism and cultural conformism? There is no conflict. You artificially create this conflict. You say, "I don't want to do it, and I have the right to do it, and I have an individual personality." This is extrapolating an unnecessary conflict into your life.
Well, as you mentioned, there have been enough role models for us to actually practice and maintain that fine line. Here is another question that comes in from the audience. It says that with smaller families and even smaller ethos systems these days, how do we save our culture from being completely westernized?
You see, first you must decide to understand that we should not get westernized. Have you taken the decision? You are enamored of Western approach because you have the money. You can travel, you can read, you can do this. People do not have all this, they don't have this problem. It is only people who have all this, they have this problem. So my understanding is, you don't think enough. You don't know enough history. You don't know enough sociology. You don't know enough economics. You don't know trans-cultural, economic, social, and political implications. How many people know today liberal democracies are failing? Tell me. Those who are talking about rights, do they know liberal democracies are collapsing because of the very concept of rights which has produced the democracy and which is producing those rights? And we are talking about rights.
Which is the act of kindness, Mr. Gurumurthy, that you have received recently from someone? This lady wants to know.
My mother, my wife, my children. They have been the example of how a person should be kind. My son, my grandson. I don't think this you can learn from schools. This you can learn from textbooks. You can learn it from social scientists. This is something so natural, but we don't devote enough time for them. We have to invest. We have to invest in people who are kind to you. That is your act of kindness to them. You take advantage of all their kindness and you exercise your rights. This is the conflict.
Mr. Gurumurthy, I have a totally flip question. And this is not coming from the audience, it's coming from the moderator or anchor, if you wish. Which is that being kind in return to a person who's kind to you seems to me far simpler than being kind to a person who's unkind to you. And I'm going to give you an example of an earlier speaker on the same kindness festival, Stephen McGowan, who is the longest held Al Qaeda captive. And he spoke to us in a very beautiful, intense session about how he had to create empathy with people who had held him captive and with absolute cruelty, as we all know. Now, I know that in this Indian context, it may seem a little stretch, but at the same time, many young people are asking or dealing with the dilemma in India today of how do you deal with someone whose ideology doesn't match yours or whose views are drastically different. Even within the house, the generations react differently. So coming back to my question, how do you be kind to someone who's not necessarily kind to you?
No, be tolerant first. Tolerance is the first act of kindness. If you are intolerant, you are not only unkind, you are promoting unkindness in others. So our forefathers told us, be tolerant to others. Which you don't like, you tolerate. For example, in our village, we used to go and worship a temple in the evening. We used to offer nariyal and banana and all that. That very night, another set of people will go to the temple and give all kinds of killings. They do. We know they are going to do that, but we don't dislike it. Okay, it is their model. Once you begin accepting others, violence is a different thing. Violence has to be controlled by the state. Don't try to control another person's violence, which is the duty of the state to control. If you take over the state's responsibility, then you are messing up with the state. The state should be, if anyone lifts the gun, he has to face the gun. There is nothing like human rights for the person who holds the gun. This is an unnecessary interference in state's affairs. I am very clear about it. Al-Qaeda has to be dealt with by the state. Finished. Any person who is violent will have to be dealt with by the state. There cannot be a group of people who lift candles and say, no, there is human rights for the violent people. They are the people most uncompassionate.
Yes. In this case, of course, he had no choice. He was held hostage, and what he shared was the
exceptional experiences.
6 years or 5 years.
These are all exceptional experiences which you have to look at like cinema. There is nothing like to be followed. How many people are going to be held as captive and how many?
It reminds me.
This is something like a cinema which you see. And don't think these are all examples. These are all exceptions. No exception is an example. They are very nice to speak about. We have to look at life as an ordinary mechanism. Extraordinary life is not an example. It may be an inspiration, but it is not an example.
So thank you, Mr. Gurumurthy, so much. We are honored and we are blessed to have your wisdom and your presence. Thank you so much.